Thank you, Senator, for that very kind and rather long introduction. It's rare that I get to hear and be reminded that I was actually president and a board member of the Congressional Chorus and American Youth Chorus. So you can see when I get into discussions about increasing STEM, occasionally I add STEAM because the A is for arts in there. As the Senator mentioned, last year Secretary Perry was here. He would be here today had he been able to make it. I am a poor substitute for him, but I am happy to be here. And indeed, it is an honor to join all of you here today to celebrate National Clean Energy Week. But before I begin, let me commend the outstanding work of Heather Reams and the Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. Heather, I want to thank you and the entire National Clean Energy Week team, including the steering committee, for all the work that you've done to make today's event possible. Very much appreciated. And of course, I want to thank all of you in the room for being the powerful supporters that you are for the cause of clean energy. Now, later this afternoon, you are going to hear from my colleagues at the Department of Energy to describe our clean energy advances in greater detail, but let me just give you a little preview. You'll hear from our Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy about our extraordinary efforts in sustainable transportation involving batteries, biofuels, hydrogen, and fuel cells. Yesterday morning, I happened to participate in a meeting with the U.S. Drive. This is an advisory committee made up of automobile manufacturers, energy companies, utilities. They've been advising DOE since the early 90s on advances and projects to pursue for sustainable transportation. You'll also hear from our Energy Efficiency Office on their advanced manufacturing and building technologies. You'll hear from our renewable energy folks about advancements that we're making in solar, wind, geothermal, and hydropower. Our nuclear office, you'll hear from them. They are developing small modular reactors of 50 megawatts, micro reactors of 1.5 megawatts. They're looking at advances in versatile test reactors. These are all exciting opportunities for the clean burning nuclear energy. Our Office of Fossil is developing clean energy technologies, including carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And you'll hear from our Loan Program Office, sometimes overlooked. This was initially passed by Congress in the Energy Policy Act of 2005 in Title 17. And remember, they have two statutory mandates. It has to be emerging technologies, and it has to be capable of reducing emissions. So other Congresses have amended and expanded that. You will hear from our Loan Program Office about some of the projects that they're working on today. But let me begin by recounting America's remarkable energy success story and how clean energy was and remains a key chapter of that story. By any measure, today, America is in the midst of a spectacular energy progress. Today, we are producing energy more abundantly, more affordably than anyone ever thought possible. And we're obtaining that energy from a wider range of resources than we ever thought possible before. This administration is deploying technologies in the all of the above energy strategy. And yes, we are using energy more cleanly and more efficiently as well. And when you think about it, this is a stunning reversal from the situation that occurred when the Department of Energy was established in response to the energy crisis of the 70s, OPEC cartel, and the oil embargo. Fearing that America's days of energy abundance were over, Congress created the Department of Energy, which we think was a good thing, But it also passed the Fuel Use Act, which prohibited the use of natural gas for electricity generation, and Congress banned the export of oil. We wanted to try to keep everything that we had and in limited supplies that we thought we had at the time here in the United States. And the leaders thought that we had a permanent energy shortage then. And the policies were developed to where we tried to do more with less or even less with less. And those experts back then really could not have been more mistaken. Truth be told, we had no energy shortage. What we had was a shortage of imagination and a loss of confidence to innovate. So how did America move from the perceived energy scarcity to the unprecedented energy abundance we have today? Well, notwithstanding the naysayers, private individuals, some industry, along with our national labs, continued to innovate, looking for technological solutions to solve our energy needs. Industry grabbed hold of some of those innovations and commercialized them. And with this innovation came a revolution in energy technology. One example I'd like to give is hydraulic fracturing. Hydraulic fracturing came about because of breakthrough technologies in a couple of things: improved buffering technologies, God bless you, multi-directional drilling, market changes, and Congress actually did the right thing by allowing the states to decide whether or not they were and how to regulate hydraulic fracturing. That allowed the oil shale revolution to occur, and we have an abundance of natural gas today. Also, photovoltaic pioneers continued to work on ways to make photovoltaics more efficient and lowered the cost. We had similar breakthrough technologies really almost in every energy source. From fossil fuels to renewables, supplies rose, costs fell, efficiencies increased, and diversity bloomed. But something else also happened. Our environment improved. It became better. And even as our economy expanded and energy development reached new heights. So how did this happen? Well, quite simply, that same innovation-driven technology revolution that unleashed our energy abundance also made our energy cleaner. And the evidence is everywhere. Increased wind production, increased solar production, the move to efficient and cleaner burning natural gas. Today, in the United States, all of our new generation for electricity is natural gas and renewables, with the exception of Georgia Power building the Vogtle plant, which is the emissions-free nuclear facility. And there's plenty of upside for both increased renewables and natural gas, and even coal. How many times you've heard that there's no such thing as clean coal? Well, I mean, look at the numbers. Due in large part to improved technology, America's coal fleet has dramatically reduced emissions of air pollutants by as much as 93% since 1970. Newer technologies can remove mercury to almost undetectable levels, and I'm proud to say that DOE has had a major role in developing these new technologies. Our Clean Coal Technology Program laid the foundation for dramatic emission reductions. Our R&D has led to energy-efficient appliances, resulting in emissions as well as billions of dollars saved each year on energy bills. And through efforts led by Oak Ridge and Idaho National Labs, DOE continues its role as the world leader in research into advanced technologies for nuclear energy, which produces more than half of America's zero emissions electricity and nearly 1/3 of the world's emission-free electricity. I can think of no better way to sum up our energy story, our clean energy story, than by citing these statistics from EPA. From 1970 to 2016, while our U.S. GDP grew 253% and vehicle miles rose by 90%, total air emissions actually fell by 73% during that same time. And what about carbon emissions? From 2005 to last year, the U.S. led the world in reducing emissions, cutting them by 14% over that period of time. I was at a G7 meeting last week with the energy ministers, and Europe is moving to natural gas because they are moving away from fossil fuels to help increase their emission reductions. And they have goals of emission reductions worthy to meet. And natural gas will help them get there, hopefully U.S. natural gas. But when I told them that we can actually measure our actual reductions and that we led the world during that period by 14%, they really were surprised that we were speaking in terms of actual reductions, not goals of reductions. So think about what this means. So America, the leading oil and gas producer in the world, that alone is an amazing comment to make. I mean, who would have thought from where we were in the 70s to today that the U.S. is leading in the production of oil and natural gas? That completely changes the geopolitics of the world. Today, rather than being handicapped by depending on OPEC nations, we are competing with the OPEC nations. Today, Russia realizes the economic threat we have on their economic well-being. And even as leading the world in oil and gas production, we're also leading the world in the carbon emissions reduction. And we're doing it with innovation and without sacrificing our economy. And clearly, innovation has made possible which many thought impossible. We've increased energy output, we've lowered energy costs, we have reduced emissions, and we have unleashed economic prosperity. Our energy industry has so driven our economic prosperity that unemployment remains at an 18-year low today. We are essentially at full employment. Anyone who wants a job in the United States can get a job in the United States. And as importantly, our technological advances have enabled us to share this bounty with our friends and allies around the world. So the lesson is clear. The choice between developing our economy and our energy and caring for our environment is a false one. When we embrace innovation over regulation, we can do both. So as we look to the future, more clean energy progress is on the horizon. Some examples include, and I've mentioned them before, the carbon capture, utilization, and storage can help reduce carbon emissions from our existing coal fleet now. This remarkable process removes most of the carbon dioxide post-combustion and then uses the captured carbon for utilization of oil and natural gas. And last year, the first commercial-scale U.S. carbon capture project, Petronova in Texas, began operations which received DOE support. Now, through DOE's Beyond Batteries initiative, we can advance hydropower by funding research to make pump storage cheaper and easier to install and permit. Our battery technologies are looking beyond lithium-ion, today's battery of choice. And as you know, it has its limits, both in holding a charge, how often do you have to charge, your iPhones? It's in our cars today. But if you read the New Yorker article, I think last week, the recycling challenges that we have with lithium-ion batteries as you go through the process. So today we're looking at a full life cycle of developing new technologies for batteries, and DOE is leading that. Our researchers at the National Renewable Energy Lab working on much less expensive solar cells than we have today. As you probably are aware, we have signed an agreement, a strategic energy partnership with India. And DOE is helping to lead discussions in a way forward on how to bring electricity to 300 million of its citizens. In the solar world, we are working on advances for crystalline liquid perovskite solar. This is, you can take liquid crystalline and put it on like a mylar balloon, and think about it, place it almost anywhere, and when we perfect getting electric current down to it, one possibility is you can have electricity to very remote and rural areas in the near future. We're working on that. That's very exciting. If you haven't been to NREL, please go up there and see that. Through our Energy Collegiate Wind Competition, we're advancing wind energy and providing students with real-world experiences that prepare them for careers in this area. And as I've mentioned, we're advancing new innovative technologies in nuclear, like the small modular reactors, as well as developing accident-tolerant fuels, which are safer fuels that can be used in existing nuclear plants to make them safer as well. So as we see further progress, as DOE helps develop the next generation technologies to improve alternate fuel vehicles, advanced combustion engine and vehicle efficiency, and to produce low-carbon domestic energy fuels, we will share our innovation with the world. We can provide nations the technology to do what we have done, create their own energy success story and their own clean energy revolution. As I had mentioned, we have the Strategic Energy Partnership with India. We have partnerships with other countries. We are sharing technology as well as our LNG to other countries. Today, we are exporting LNG to 30 countries on 5 continents. And we are assisting these other countries to reduce their emissions. Now, as we progress toward zero emissions goal, and indeed as all countries are moving toward their goals for reducing emissions, we can do it without hampering the growth of these developing nations. So as we celebrate Clean Energy Week, let us commit to stick with the policy of producing and using all of the above fuels while reducing emissions. Let us commit to unleash innovation, both to improve what we have and secure the future we want. Let us invest in emission-free resources like nuclear, renewables, while at the same time making our fossil fuels cleaner. And most of all, let us honor the integrity of people everywhere by giving them the freedom and the power to innovate. And as we do, we'll open up new possibilities in technology and write even brighter chapters in America's remarkable clean energy story. Thank you very much for having me speak to you today.